Welcome, folks. I see we're popping in here. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our session on understanding the quality criteria for systems of performance assessment. I see some folks are still joining in as we come out of this needed and restful break. I have just a few housekeeping items that I'll chat about before we dive in. First thing is that this is a workshop session and we're really excited to feature lots of discussion. So as you are able, we welcome your cameras on for the conversation. Although, of course, we're happy to have folks who are dialing in by phone. And throughout the presentation, we're going to use the chat to share resources and to field folks' questions. So please be mindful as we do that to keep the back and forth to a minimum. That's just because we'd much rather bring the discussion live and have that come into the room. And again, we're really thrilled that you could join us. And I invite you, as we get settled, to drop your name, your organization, and your physical location into the chat. And I think at 3:01, we're about ready to get started. So I'll kick us off. My name is Larkin Willis. I'm a research and policy associate at the Learning Policy Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that conducts and communicates high quality research to advance empowering and equitable learning for each and every child. And I know that mission is part of what brought y'all here into this symposium and into this room. Good morning, Rebecca. I see folks coming in on the chat. My work at LPI on our performance assessment team is focused on how K-12 systems and post-secondary institutions can connect and better communicate about students' prior learning experiences, their skills, and their competencies. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Aneesha. Would you like to introduce yourself and say a little bit about the work that you tackle?
Sure. Thanks, Larkin. Hi, everybody. We're so excited to talk with you all today about some tools to support performance assessment work. As Larkin said, I'm Aneesha Badrinarayan. I am the Director of State Performance Assessment Initiatives at LPI, and I oversee our performance assessment activities sort of across the gamut. My work personally focuses primarily on the development of high quality state assessment systems that include and center performance assessments and other ways of sort of centering students and student experiences in assessment system design, and sort of everything that goes into that, from navigating federal and state policy issues to actually supporting the technical development of these systems. And I've been really fortunate to work with Larkin on this exciting project that we're going to tell you more about today.
Thanks, Aneesha. And some of you all may have caught Aneesha on a panel earlier today. She is going to save some of her voice. I'll be doing a lot of the talking through today, although we'll be able to tap. She'll bring all of her expertise into our group discussions and help move us in our thinking. Here's a little bit about how the next 90 minutes are going to shake out. We're going to start with a quick discussion to ground us in the kind of learning experiences that we're talking about within performance assessment systems. Then I'm going to provide just a quick background and introduce a forthcoming LPI resource that's been designed for school, district, and network leaders to support performance assessment in their systems. And then we'll dedicate the bulk of our time together to a three-part discussion. We're going to have a jigsaw where we'll break up and explore different parts of the resource. Then we'll have a spotlight on how those features show up in an actual system. And lastly, we'll conclude with a conversation about what it will take to seed and sustain performance assessment in the school systems that you primarily serve. So we're really excited to tap the knowledge that each of you bring into this session. And we're going to start with a quick poll to get to know who's in the room. So go ahead and select which role best describes you and your work. We're about halfway through. Half folks have participated. Getting that up there. I think we can, I think we're set to close the poll. And y'all should be able to see the results on your screen. It looks like we have a good mix in the room. We've got a lot of folks who describe themselves as other. So I'm really thrilled to have some introductions as we get discussing. I'm also seeing some technical assistance providers, policymakers. We've got good representation from teachers, teacher leaders, and instructional coaches, as well as some central office administrators. So welcome. I think, we'll have a more robust discussion from folks who can see from these various perspectives. So we're really pleased to have you all here. And to launch our discussion, as I mentioned, and I'm going to invite you each to get grounded in the types of learning experiences that performance assessment supports and generates. So I invite you each to think about a time that you've learned by doing. It could be in school, out of school, it could be 20 years ago, it could be last week. But I want you to think about, what did it take to learn by doing, and how were you supported in that learning? In a moment, we're going to zoom into some random breakout groups where you can introduce yourself and please share your learning.
All right, the room should have just opened, so please feel free to join your breakout rooms.
Welcome back, welcome back. I know that it's we can have a little bit of whiplash doing a simple turn and talk in a virtual format. So I think we've got everybody back in the room. And I wanted to take a moment just to share some of what came up for us. I saw Marianne got us started in the chat reflecting on the technology learning curve that we've all embraced over the last few years. And I want to invite others, come off mute and share your learning by doing experience, or if you're more comfortable, drop it in the chat. Oh, nice. Got an avid fly fisherman. That practice definitely makes perfect. Some trailblazers, even within district work. Any reflections on the second part of the question around, what were some of the things that made that learning possible? I saw Marianne lifted up the patience, the ability to give ourselves grace, but support that comes from others. Rolanda saying courage and humility. Christina saying trial and error. And Shane, I would love to see a picture. Maybe we can tweet with the hashtag and share in the virtual sphere. Some of the themes I'm seeing: community, openness to others come up, freedom given by an administrator to do the work, freedom to do that trial and error. And some of the themes that I'm seeing are around certainly trial and error, feedback from trusted others, either peers or experts, and certainly, setting goals, understanding that you're on a learning curve and marking your progress along the way, which requires some evidence of effectiveness. Those are the building blocks of strong systems of performance assessment, which is our topic for today. So I'm going to move us forward. I'm going to share a little bit about the quality criteria for performance assessment, which describe learnings from the Reimagining College Access initiative. That initiative is driven by a desire to connect two trends out in the world: The first trend is an increasing understanding that students need a full array of deeper learning skills to succeed. Systems that are committed to that often use performance assessments as a key anchor for teaching and learning. In Susan's presentation yesterday, she shared some of the maps from the Center of Innovation in Education that showed just how pervasive performance assessment policies and practices have become in states across the country. The second trend that we're trying to connect is in higher education, where we're seeing more and more interest in considering multiple measures for admissions, placement, and advising decisions in order to tackle longstanding barriers of access. And most recently, you've probably seen, headlines over the last few years around the expansion of test optional policies. There's litigation regarding the use of race and ethnicity as a factor in admission. And so we believe, as part of the RCA initiative, that we can connect these trends in somewhat of a virtuous cycle that you see up on the screen that will improve deeper learning outcomes and advance equity in both sectors. In particular, the more that institutions of higher education care about performance assessment information, the more K-12 systems are likely to transform their teaching and learning in ways that are beneficial to students. And this is the thinking that brought us to develop the quality criteria for performance assessment. We kept getting the same question, which was, what do high quality systems of performance assessment look like? Beyond the task level, what does it really take to support and sustain performance assessment-based teaching and learning? And how do we communicate with one another about that with broad stakeholder audiences? So that's the spirit of this tool. And many hands were involved in the work. The quality criteria were developed by a blue ribbon panel of assessment experts. Then they were test-driven within a networked community of educational leaders that were committed to advancing performance assessment practices in California. You'll see a link in a minute to the California Performance Assessment Collaborative website that includes some of the resources about who where those systems are and what they're doing. And the purpose of the resulting criteria is to create a tool or a resource, if you will, that's designed to support school, district, and network leaders in examining their existing systems for evidence of the policies, the structures, and the features that enable the use of performance-based assessment in the service of deeper learning for all students. The resource includes criteria, it has aligned indicators and recommendations to help support systems leaders to do three things. First, to assess their current context. Second, to identify high leverage opportunities to advance performance assessment systems. And then third, to design next steps to help navigate their specific contexts. And I want to pause before we dig into the structure of the tool and just ask, Aneesha, is there anything else you'd like to add about the purpose and development of the quality criteria?
No, I think you did a great job, Larkin. I'll just note that Roman dropped a question in the chat around sort of the relationship between who drives this boat. And I think, and Larkin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but or if you disagree with me, I think we absolutely believe that both sides of the equation can be both a starter and a catalyst for this work, and really strongly believe that, in fact, you can't have only one side drive the work. So if higher ed tomorrow decided to accept performance assessments writ large and there were no performance assessments to feed into that system, it's unlikely to be a deeply successful system, and vice versa. If there are tons of great efforts going on, we need systemic supports and catalysts to be able to do that work. So I think that we absolutely believe the leadership can and should come from both sides. But would you add anything to that, Larkin?
Absolutely. I see Rhett jumped in to characterize this as a chicken and an egg. And one of the metaphor that we like to use on our team is hands clapping. You can't have one hand clapping. you need them both going. So I really appreciate that question. So let's go ahead. We'll dig in. We'll spend just a brief moment digging into the structure. of the tool. I'm going to give an overview, and then we're going to break out into jigsaw discussions to explore the parts of it more deeply. But I do want to spend a little bit of time here talking about the central commitments that guide this resource. Performance assessment systems that advance meaningful learning for all students are built. This is what our input came together to show, that they're built upon 4 central commitments that provide the foundation and the orientation for all performance assessment activities. These commitments that systems are designed to prioritize include, first, equitable opportunities and outcomes. This means that the system is designed to enable students to build upon their assets from diverse experiences, cultures, and languages to demonstrate mastery of core competencies. The system holds all students to the same high standards by recognizing the strengths, providing supports, and removing barriers to accessing and demonstrating success on rigorous material. The second core commitment is supporting the development of key competencies. And we've been talking about this yesterday and this morning. How can systems more explicitly define informal statements like a graduate profile, the content knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions that it supports in all students to develop across a progression of learning? The third central commitment is around aligned teaching and learning, right? Our systems have to be grounded in teaching and learning that promotes students' development of complex knowledge, skills, and abilities. The curriculum, the instruction, and the assessment all have to flow from that statement of the graduate profile, if you will, and be infused into the learning that happens in daily classroom experiences across subjects and across grade levels. And the fourth central commitment is system learning for continuous improvement, right? We haven't solved this puzzle. We don't have the perfect assessment system out there. And so this commitment has to do with ongoing, authentic, and robust demonstrations of learning that provide a body of evidence for what students know, are able to do, and that continue to develop over time. There's teams of teachers and leaders that iteratively review the design, the delivery, and the outcomes of performance assessments that help inform adjustments to the tasks and changes to instructional practice. And I think we're ready. Thank you, Aneesha. And these commitments live out in 3 key practice areas. So this is the meat of the tool. First, assessments. This practice area speaks to, okay, what are the features of the actual assessment instruments that contribute to high quality systems? The second area is supports, which has to do with the infrastructure, the policies, and the practices that are needed at the systems level, right? So we heard in this morning's keynote about things like master schedules, bell schedules that provide the right allotted time to spend on performance assessment. And Susan also added in her remarks that teachers can be expert evaluators, right? And we need to support the educators to enact that role. And then the last practice area is data practices. This has to do with the routines, the processes, and the communication structures that help educators, leaders, students, and their families make meaning of their data in ways that actively promote better teaching and learning. And in a moment, we're going to break out into groups. We'll zoom out again, and you'll have the chance to look at these practice areas more closely. And I want you to be on the lookout for 3 important items to inform that discussion. They're coming to you in the chat. The first is a link to our handout for the quality criteria for performance assessment systems. The second is your assigned practice area. That will tell you when you go into your breakout group, depending on your group number, which area are you taking a look at on your screen. And the third is these prompts that are up now on the slide. And if you're following along in the slides on your own screen, they're here to help support the discussion. And I think for a transparent facilitation moment, I think Aneesha had a question for me. We're gonna assign these groups. So you'll go randomly into one of 6 groups. So you'll either be focusing in on assessments, supports, or data practices. But when we come back together, you'll get to hear from the folks who drilled in an area that's different from yours.
All right, I'm about to open up the breakout rooms. I want to just flag that there are some really good questions emerging in the chat. I think these will be really great things for us to discuss as a whole group when we come back. But Nathan, I just wanted to flag, like, I would actually, like, you raised this question of an asset-based lens and into the commitments. I would actually even say, like, how does the asset-based lens fit into the criteria? And I think that would be a wonderful lens for us to keep in the back of our minds as we actually dive into this work, and we can come back and talk about where you saw that and where they could be better oriented around that. So I just wanted to say that, and then I'm going to open up breakouts. You should be invited to your breakout. This will look different than your breakout previously, but let me know if you don't receive the invite for any reason. All right.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. We wanted to hold a little bit of time to hear from the discussions in different groups, what came up for folks. So this is a space to share our learning. I wonder if we want to invite first, and we can, rather than going by group, we'll just go by practice area, and we'll start from the bottom up. So why don't we start with data practices? Any reflections or insights from that group?
I can share. Elizabeth here from Spring Lake Park in Minnesota. One of the things we talked about as a point of appreciation that we've also started to see come into our context is the idea of using multiple measures with intention, particularly when it comes to high stakes decisions for our kids, but also just across the board, and kind of coupling that with the idea of triangulating that data to make sure that we're getting kind of a holistic view of all of the opportunities and demonstrations that kids have provided.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Any others?
I think the one other thing that I was pulsing around in my head a little bit was biases that sometimes come in with alternative measures, alternative ways of assessing students. You know, if a student's not successful on this and they are successful through this other measure, does that mean this other measure isn't rigorous? Is the, you know, sort of thinking about where people's biases might already be and how they interpret these different approaches.
Hi, I'm John Downs from the University of Vermont. I'm curious about the kind of community schools policy context with some of this and the tensions I can see, as well as the potential I can see for out-of-school learning experiences and performance assessment, so both in terms of something like the data practices. Are they designed in such a way that other stakeholders can join the conversation or that can contribute data in a sense as mentors or whatever, or industry standard performance assessments for career and technical education as opposed to those that might be designed by schools? I'm just curious if, since some states and districts may be confronting both policy agendas at the same time, but I haven't heard them talking to each other a whole lot. Curious about that.
This is Roman Stearns from Scaling Student Success in California. I echo that, John. I think there should be opportunities for other members of the community, adults and youth, to be honest, to give input into students' demonstration of mastery around whole child outcomes that might happen through after school programs, through internships, through scouts, through sports, through, you know, even entrepreneurial ventures that students, you know, are engaged in, whatever it happens to be. We need systems in place to enable a much broader pool of participants in the in the performance assessment process, rather than only educators.
That has me hearkening back to yesterday's Vision for Education 2050. I'm seeing some Some clapping on the screen. Do we want to move up the chain then to supports? Any reflections from folks that dove into that section of the tool?
I think the theme of our conversation was universally that it needs to be localized, those supports, whether that be state or district or individual school, or even school size, I think matters. And then just did a talk about how in large schools especially, this is competency-based assessment really seems to evolve at a department by department level, which on one level maybe works against some of the whole student, but maybe is what it is and is still, the approach regardless. So that's my attempt to summarize the conversation.
I'd say in our group, we started talking towards the end about policy environment and also looking at the state policy side of it and there was a session on this earlier today about the flexibilities that may exist in state policy and those that may get in the way, but the capacity for the local entity to actually use those flexibilities. Like, do they have the understanding of what they can and can't do, or the will to do what they can or can't do, that sort of thing. I would say in that framework document, the policies come up on the right side, but not on the left column. And so I do think it's probably worth raising it as well.
Thank you. That's a good point. Assessments. Anyone from the assessments group? But I see that there's a little bit of sharing in the chat around this, but if anybody wants to give their voice to it.
I first have to apologize because I took all the notes and it was such a robust conversation and I had lots and lots and I went to press send when we were brought back into the breakout and everything disappeared. So I was trying to recreate what was in there. So only from memory of our main points. So my group, I apologize. It was a wonderful conversation.
Some of the things that we surfaced during our conversation is around the centeredness of the assessment framework on the students to empower them to own their data and to make it actionable for themselves. But we also surfaced the difficulty of assessing in a systems level where it's just so complex, at various levels. So even things like system levels decision making, at what level are you going to focus the framework of assessment in? So those things surfaced during our conversation.
Some of the big things that were coming out front were, of course, mastery, performance-based, and that triangulation that someone mentioned in the first session or first group.
Thank y'all. I know we could sit here for the rest of the for the rest of the time. There's a lot to talk about, but I did want to present the conceptual piece of the tool before shifting us into a conversation about its use and brainstorm a little bit about how we might see this playing out. So before that, we have a quick poll to get a sense of where folks are. I invite you to think about the system that you primarily operate within or are most familiar with. It could be a place that you serve and actively work within. It could be a school where your child attends. Seeing one response, two coming through. Nice, we're about halfway. Give just 10 more seconds for anybody who wants to fill out. Looks like we're about 80%. And we're good to close. So the question was, how many of you all are already using performance assessment? And I'm really encouraged. I know it's the bias of this group, but of course I'm seeing it's on the radar for everyone. There's a good portion of folks that have piecemeal efforts underway. That's a little bit, we talked about that in our discussion about departmentally here, or, in one area versus another. We've got some folks that are talking about it, but haven't done anything yet. And so there's a potential for a lot of learning there. And then we have our folks who have a comprehensive effort underway. And so we're really excited to hear more from y'all in the discussion too. Is there, let's see. Okay.
Sorry.
So then I want to take a look. I want to ground us in an example, but again, I know that there are folks in the room that have their own. Just taking a look at how these practices play out in a seasoned system that's been using performance assessment for quite some time. So, oh, and excuse me, I was gonna say something before I jumped to that. Of course, for this tool, right, we'd mentioned that we have some recommendations about the use of the quality criteria. And from the practitioners that we spoke to who applied this framework to their systems, we came up with 4 key next steps, 4 places where the information that y'all just dug into could help seed and sustain change. The first is as a thinking tool, right? Pulling it up with a committed team that's working on performance assessment across a system or within one department or team. And the key question there is who needs to be involved, right? Who has the context to be able to take a look at this and dive deeply. Secondly, and I can see some of us who have a comprehensive effort underway may want to use this tool to celebrate and build on assets that already exist within your system and to support a conversation about, okay, what's currently working for us? Third, you could consider using it to choose an initial focus area. There are different access points into this work. And we've mentioned that, based on your context, based on your size, based on the history of the learning initiatives within your system. So a tool like this kind of helps lay it all out so that you can have a sense of, okay, what needs the most attention or where might be a good first step. And then finally, to leverage complementary tools and research. No, this doesn't have it all, y'all. So it invites questions around what else do we need to know? Where else do we need to look? Where do we need to pull more robust examples? Where do we need to join symposia like this to be able to learn from folks that are just a little bit further along or have a little more of that detail or example? So now I'm going to talk to us a little bit about a place where the 3 practice areas, and I will also say the 4 commitments, are really playing out on the ground. This is one example of what we're driving towards. And if you join today's keynote, you have a couple more models in your mind, and then certainly through the work that you all are advancing. Please note where the context is relevant for you, but also some spaces where there's difference. I'm going to share a little bit about the New York Performance Standards Consortium, which is an established network of secondary schools that have been using performance assessments and graduation profiles for 2 decades. The consortium's performance-based assessment system is grounded in in-depth inquiry-based curricula that's been designed for state standards, and it's taught by all consortium teachers. Following their internally set guidelines, teachers develop what they call performance-based assessment tasks, and that helps determine students' readiness to graduate. These are scored using common rubrics within each of the core academic subjects. So there's a rubric for English language arts, a rubric for mathematics, and so on and so forth. And in addition to the tasks that students produce, they're also required to present on their portfolio, almost like a formal presentation, responding to audience questions like a dissertation defense. That is not a level of learning that I was engaging in high school. So just pausing to acknowledge that's the shape of the curriculum and instruction. The consortium attributes their success to the professionalism of their teacher practitioners. So this drives at some of the supports that exist within the system. They've cultivated an infrastructure that includes policies and practices that provide ongoing professional development. As I mentioned, it's available to all educators within the consortium. So for example, their Center for Inquiry works directly with teachers to help enable teacher-led professional development and build time in for opportunities where educators get to share their experiences and learn from one another. That includes sharing their curriculum and courses, but it also includes developing and revising these rubrics that are used within and across disciplines, and then regularly calibrating their scoring. Notably, one of the practices that we want to call out is that annually the New York Performance Standards Consortium conducts moderation studies that help monitor task quality and scoring reliability. So earlier we had a question that was around, how do we attend to the biases that come through, particularly if we're doing innovative assessments that rely on qualitative evaluation. And so these types of calibration exercises and moderation studies ensure that both task expectations and the associated scoring is aligned to the learning goals, calibrated across the schools, and it yields trustworthy judgments that mean something outside of a specific classroom context. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit about the data practices that the consortium uses. They've got a robust assessment system that includes leveraging a wide range of information about students' progress through their academic program. That includes external evaluations by the Department of Education superintendents, members of the Performance Assessment Review Board, and external research. In addition, they gather data on students' post-secondary activities, so they track where their students go. And when they couple that with robust opportunities for teachers and school and network leaders to examine their formative practice throughout the year, these kinds of external evaluations give evidence about how students are faring, and they also surface actionable and trustworthy information about system performance without the routine use of standardized assessments. So I want to call out kind of like what the impact of this work. Research has found that students at the consortium, they're diverse by race, ethnicity, immigration status, disability status, gender, housing circumstances, socioeconomic status, academic history, and first language. They begin high school with more marginal academic records. However, they graduate, enter college, and persist in college, gain credits, and sustain higher GPAs than their peers. This evidence reinforces the findings that we know from other research suggesting that learning experiences that are structured around performance-based assessments actually support student achievement and can help narrow race, class, and linguistic gaps in secondary and higher education achievement. So since 2015, the consortium has sustained a partnership with the City University of New York. And through this partnership, consortium graduates apply to CUNY colleges based on their portfolios of performance-based tasks. Students who show their competence on performance assessments appear to fare well within the CUNY system. This is, I'd mentioned, since 2015, so they're starting to follow their first graduating classes. And even when students are scoring below the admissions threshold on college entrance exams, they are shown to be persisting. They're shown to be, having comparable, if not surpassing the GPAs of some of their peers. So in this way, we're building out an evidence base that performance-based assessment offers a path for how holistic scoring could enrich equity in access and success. So if you want to learn a little bit more about this example, certainly we can pull it into our discussion. LPI has also published a report that does a deep dive into the New York Performance Standards Consortium and their partnership with the City University of New York. And we're going to drop that link in the chat. And certainly we'd be happy to follow up and chat about that. But I just wanted to offer that as a vision, as what a comprehensive system looks like. And I'm hoping we can use that as a jumping off point now for our final piece of the discussion. We're going to resurface that recurring question that I mentioned kind of drove the development of the quality criteria in the first place. It's this question, what would it take to move systems in this direction? And so for this next breakout, we're going to ask you to put on a new hat. You'll do a little perspective taking or perspective swapping to help drive a discussion about what needs to change. So the first thing you'll do is you'll pick a role. Do you want to be the student, parent, teacher, school leader, network leader, or post-secondary? There were also additional stakeholders that came up in our prior discussion. So if you have a hat in mind or you have a role in mind that you'd like to take for this conversation, feel free to go off script. And then from that vantage, we're going to invite you to consider when it comes to implementing and iterating the practice areas of performance assessment systems, what are your highest priorities? What support do you need and from whom? And then third, what obstacles do you anticipate? So we'll go into these breakout groups for 15 minutes, and then we'll swap insights as a large group. And thank you, Aneesha, for dropping those discussion questions in the chat. I hope they stay there for everyone as we get ready to break out again.
And I'll open up breakout rooms in a moment, but Larkin, I have just one clarifying question. Everyone gets to choose their own hat and then they're talking in mixed groups, or do you want people to select into their sort of like the hat that they chose?
I think everybody picks your hat and we'll move into groups, and I'll let you all, kind of work that out. If we've got a breakout group where everybody wants to be the hat of a teacher, then we can have a teacher focused conversation, or, there's a lot of value for folks donning various perspectives as well. So I'll let you all choose and move that.
Thanks, Larkin. So I'm going to open up breakouts in a moment. I'd recommend introducing yourself with your new hat, possibly renaming yourself to include your hat so that everyone in your breakout room remembers sort of like what perspective you're thinking about this from. And all right, I'm opening the rooms.
I'll invite you to do your character transition. We'll engage in this next discussion as our actual selves, but I'm excited to hear about some of the priorities and needs and obstacles that came up in your conversations. I don't have a set order for us to share, but I'd love to hear what came up.
Kind of difficult to share because there were so many different perspectives in our group. I think there was 5 of us and we all picked different hats. So it does make it challenging to summarize, but it just reminds us that there are so many different perspectives with some overlapping and some differing priorities, needs and challenges. Yeah, I had one other thought and I just lost it.
Marianne, while maybe that thought is coming back, can I just ask if there was and this maybe is for your whole group, like, is there a particular example or something that sort of highlights like what, I don't even know if tension is the right word, but that range of different priorities and perspectives that came up? Is there something that's sort of like sticking with you from your group's conversation? And again, this is maybe for the whole group. I don't need to put you on the spot.
I don't know. I invite my group members to share. Nothing's coming up for me right now.
So when Jane shared, like I think she took on an administrator hat, and the first thing she said was, my priorities would depend on what stage we are in the implementation. And then she mentioned the orchestration necessary to be able to to kind of sync all the moving pieces. And there's always going to be tension whenever you're orchestrating something. So I think that really speaks to the complexity of the work that's at hand and the assessment of it.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good reminder for us all. Like, it's just, it's such a complex system to navigate. And when you're trying to create like big changes, there's a lot of moving pieces. So thank you for raising that and for sharing that in your group.
And with our group, we had 5 hats. But then we realized each hat could be a number of different perspectives, like I represented a student, but I could be a student going to college, or a student that's, struggling, or, so there's so many complex perspectives that have to be brought in other than just the label of the role.
Yeah. It's such a good, it's making me think about and reflect that, gosh, like we have a lot of listening to do when we try to think about engaging these systems, right? Like, to your point, Amy, there are so many different perspectives, and even in this sort of simulated space, right, of like choosing one hat, there was lots of different perspectives going around. You multiply that by the number of actual stakeholders in a system, there's a lot to navigate there. So thank you for that reminder.
I would add that one commonality we all had, though, was the interconnectedness between the various perspectives, right? So the rest of you all, I need support from you, and or you could be serving as a barrier and obstacle to me at every level, right? So the principal could either, the teacher might need the principal could be the teacher's obstacle, or the principal could be the teacher's support, and it could happen in that way no matter what hat you're wearing.
Yeah, it makes me think about like, how do we center some of those considerations in some of these conversations? Like, it's not that barriers or assets are necessarily absolute. It can be really contextual. It can be very much dependent on the perspective, and it's making me wonder about that. Kevin, I don't want to put pressure on you to come off of mute, but I'd be interested if like there were some obstacles that are coming up that were shared across many different perspectives. It'd be really interesting to hear that.
I'm happy to share, but I will say I'm intended to be a passive observer here, because I'm nothing more than an auditor of public education. So I've just come to really listen and learn. But one of the thoughts expressed in our group was communication seems to be a major obstacle. And so regardless of your perspective, whether you're the student, the parent, the state leader, teacher, whomever, there's a lot of terms of art that are being misunderstood depending on your perspective, the hat you're wearing. And so I think communication is a barrier that's being shared amongst the different perspectives. So
Thanks.
So I'll speak onto that. And Kevin, the Utah State Board of Education, that's an interesting organization. I'd like to learn more about that. So like Melissa with our group also mentioned communication as one of these challenges, and Kelly chimed in from the district perspective. That communication a lot of times has to be targeted in an effort this kind of broad within systems. If the communication, like there's not just one message that everyone gets. At the beginning of like change initiatives, there's like one vision that everyone buys into. And then like part of the challenge of kind of building out the supports for that effort are that each kind of stakeholder group requires a slightly nuanced or kind of personalized communication effort in order to ensure that both misunderstandings or misinterpretations aren't kind of carried to maturity, and that there continues to be this kind of like connectivity across what all the different groups are kind of working on. And so one of the conversations we had in our group with the kind of systems role as our guiding light was in Utah, we have kind of established that broader vision. And now we're in the the process of trying to build out specific guidance and supports connected to each of the different roles within our state, in order that there's both cohesiveness and like continued support going forward.
Thank you for sharing, Nathan. It's an interesting one thing that I was just reflecting on the questions that Larkin posed to us, and it it feels like communication is something that actually might check all of these buckets. Like it's a priority for a number of reasons. It's a support that many stakeholders like need for either in order to communicate out or to help with their understanding of a system. And I think to the point that many of you have made, it is currently potentially an obstacle, and sort of miscommunications are sort of there. It's an interesting one that is just sort of like checks potentially all of the boxes.
Aneesha, if I can make one more comment. It's really striking to me how many sessions that I go to at Aurora year after year in which people talk at me about the importance of engaged learners. And so like, I actually just want to publicly say that I really appreciate the design of your session in that like it is participant centered, so to speak. Like you give us some like content, and the majority of it is us getting to kind of grapple with the questions that you pose, which I think leads to greater learning than talking at me for 45 minutes with 70 slides. The last session I went to had 70 slides.
I was just saying, I was like, wait, I really hope that wasn't my session. But I don't think we had 70 slides, so I don't think that was it. Thank you for saying that. Larkin did a lot of really great work on this, and I think something that we believe, and Larkin has heard me be on the soapbox a lot, is I think adult learning it's important to model good adult learning in these kinds of things as well. Like we are learning how to do this work too, all of us, not like and we only, I think we only learn by doing. So thank you for calling that out. Larkin, I know we're coming close to the end of our time together, so I think I want to pass it back to you, and thanks for letting me just like jump in. Sorry, I like conversation too much. I like couldn't, this is why mute buttons are good for me on Zoom, because from jumping in.
I love it when you come off mute. And I'm seeing Marianne note that like we have come full circle in this conversation, and I just want to thank you all for joining. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I have a feeling that we could talk for the rest of the afternoon. And Aneesha, if you don't mind, we've got like we just have 2 slides left. One has our contact information and a little bit of information also about the Reimagining College Access initiative that this work is housed under at the Learning Policy Institute. If you're interested in this problem of practice about the transfer of information from K-12 systems into higher ed, I want to plug that our colleague Monica Martinez, along with Edgar Montes from the Mastery Transcript Consortium and Ed Devine from Xavier University, they're going to be talking tomorrow about using K-12 performance assessments and competency-based transcripts in college admissions. So that will be tomorrow from noon to 1 Eastern. Please go to our website, check us out, subscribe to our mailing list, and ping us if there's anything you want to talk more deeply about. And then the last thing I want to plug is just that, we love feedback. So if you learn something from this session, if you have some ways that we could change what we do when we engage y'all in the future, share your thoughts on this poll. And I wanted to end a little early so that you had an authentic chance to do that now before, of course, you run to the next thing that's coming up at the half hour. So with that, I just want to thank you all for being here. It's been a good discussion.